Good evening, everyone. I think people have connected with us on Zoom as well as on YouTube Live now. 5:32, and I think we are good to go for the today's session, which is basically we are going to deal with e-invoicing under GST. So, what is e-invoicing? So e-invoicing, as it is highlighted by the National Informatics Center, it states that e-invoice is a system in which your B2B invoices are going to be authenticated electronically by the GSTIN portal for further purposes on the common portal. Under e-invoicing, for each invoice that is uploaded with the invoice registration portal, IRP, I will be referring to this IRP very frequently. So whatever invoice details that are uploaded on the IRP, on this IRP, each invoice will be assigned a unique number, which will be called invoice registration number, IRN. So this IRN is going to be the key for e-invoicing throughout the entire process. So good evening, everyone. E-invoicing as e-invoicing is actually not a very new concept in GST, because currently it has been in operation since last 1.5 years now. Under the GST, what the government felt was there needs to be some sort of standard format, so standard computer readable format, wherein all the invoices that are generated can be accumulated at a single point for the government for easy tracking, easy references, reducing tax evasions, for better reconciliation, and so on and so forth. And hence they decided to bring in this concept of e-invoice. What has happened is, under e-invoicing, initially the plan was to bring in from 1st April 2020, but as you all know, the pandemic happened, and once that happened, all the plans went haywire, and subsequently in October 2018, October 2020, they decided to implement this phase wise. So what has happened is, basically they have ensured that once the old set of taxpayers got used to e-invoicing, they added another set of taxpayer by reducing the limit for which e-invoicing will be applicable. So that is how they have implemented e-invoicing. Moving forward, just to start, what is the genesis? What is the basis for, or what is the basic ideology or principle that lies behind e-invoicing? So this is enshrined in Rule 48 of the CGST rules. So what Rule 48 of the CGST rules states that notified persons, class of registered persons, they have to upload certain information in form GST INV01, and after uploading this information on a government portal, the government portal will share a unique invoice reference number, and this invoice reference number has to be made available on each and every invoice that is issued. To ensure that there is 100% compliance, what the government has also done is, in the next sub rule itself, they say that any person to whom this e-invoice provisions are applicable, if they don't issue an e-invoice but issue invoice in any other manner, such an invoice will not be considered as a valid tax invoice. So you can understand the importance and ramifications that will happen if e-invoice is applicable to you, and then you don't and yet you don't follow it. So we'll understand the consequences in the later half, but it is very important to understand that once you are covered by the invoicing provision, you have to make sure that you comply with it. Otherwise, it is actually going to be a very painful task. Moving ahead, the next is, how is this e-invoicing has been phase wise implemented. to begin with, we need to first understand that e-invoicing for B2B transaction and B2C transactions are handled differently. For B2C, the e-invoicing is applicable only for entities having turnover which is greater than 500 crore. So today we are not going to be discussing about B2C e-invoicing. What we are going to focus on is basically B2B transactions, wherein the turnover threshold has been determined at 20 crore rupees with effect from 1st April 2022. So what the government is here trying to say is, if in any of the previous financial years your turnover crossed rupees 20 crores, then you are expected to start e-invoicing from 1st April 2022. As you can see in the table below, initially the threshold was 500 crores from 1st October 2020. Then after 3 months, they reduced it to 100 crores. And then after another 3 months, they reduced it further to 50 crores. And then once the taxpayers all having turnover above 50 crores got settled down for the entire 1 year, they now reduce the threshold to further value of INR 20 crores. So moving forward, any taxpayer who has a turnover of greater than 20 crores in any of the previous financial year, it need not be just 2020, 2021, it can be any in the GST regime. Then they have to ensure that they start complying with e-invoice provisions with effect from 1st April 2022. Moving ahead, before we stop discussing B2C, just like to highlight how B2B and B2C e-invoicing are different. In B2B invoicing, we have when the data from the system is going to be sent to the government portal, in return you are going to get a IRN, a QR code which is static. In case of B2C, there is only a QR code which is a dynamic QR code, and this in B2C, the purpose of this dynamic QR code is to facilitate online payment. However, in case of B2B, the purpose is for compliance, so that ensuring that everything is happening on track, on time, and also that reconciliation also happens very faster, because as we will go on with the next few slides, we will understand that how reconciliation will reduce as delayed activities are going to be avoided. In case of B2B, the e-invoicing IRN and the QR code will be obtained from the government portal. However, in case of B2C, it is going to be self-generated. So right now, we keep B2C e-invoicing aside, and we will only focus on B2B e-invoicing moving forward. Okay, so we have been discussing as to the IRP, Invoice Registration Portal. So now we see that the government has introduced another portal, einvoice1.gst.gov.in. On this portal, first you need to enable yourself to whom this e-invoice provisions are going to be applicable. Once you enable yourself, subsequently you will have to register and create your login credentials for each of your GST registrations. So in effect, what is going to happen is, moving forward, we will have 3 portals, 3 different websites for one single GST user, for one single GST registration. One wherein we have our registration details, where we file our regular GST returns, we file refund applications if required. The second one is the e-way bill, which was started in 2018, 2019. And now this is the third one, which is the e-invoice portal. All the 3, though are separate, at the back end they are linked, and how they are linked we will see moving ahead. So yeah, the government has now introduced a new website for e-invoicing, which is einvoice1.gst.gov.in. So so before we actually dive in, we would like to just broadly explain or highlight how this process of e-invoicing generally happens. Okay, so currently what we do is, when either in our invoice software or our accounting software, the invoice details are actually punched, all the details are filled, And generally, if e-invoicing is not applicable, once the data entry is done, the invoice is generated, invoice is printed, and then sent to customer immediately. Now what will happen is once invoice details are fed in your accounting or your invoicing software, you will have to wait. You will have to first extract relevant details from the invoice. These details will have to be first entered into a separate Excel or a utility file. That Excel or utility file will create a JSON format. This JSON format will then have to be uploaded on the IRP portal. Once that has been uploaded, immediately the IRP portal will validate it, and it will give back a signed JSON which will contain IRN and the QR code. This IRN QR code enabled JSON will then have to be again entered back into your system. Your system will then read it and print this IRN and QR code on your invoice. So, and then you are actually going to print it and send it to your customer. If e-invoice is applicable, you cannot send any invoice to your customers which does not have IRN and the QR code. So please ensure that once these provisions are applicable, no invoice goes to your customer which does not bear these details. So this idea may sound very cumbersome if you have say 50, 100 invoices on a daily basis. To do this exercise, it might be a little cumbersome. Every time taking out data, entering into another Excel file, and then uploading it, then getting another file and re-uploading this data in your software, and then generating. It might be time consuming. So what is the second option? The second option is basically you take help of ASP, GSP. ASPs are basically application service providers and GST Suvidha providers. What these guys do is basically they would provide integration with your existing software, existing invoicing or your ERP. And once that is done, the same process continues, but just that instead of punching it in a separate Excel file or a separate utility, they might give you a button on your screen wherein they will share or push this data to the invoice portal at the backend. By they themselves will pull the relevant details that is required from your software and then send it to the IRP. They at the backend will themselves retrieve the QR code and the IRN and help integrate it in your invoice at the same time. So this generally happens in a very fast manner. Our experience suggests that it takes not more than 5 to 7 seconds for generation of an QR code IRN once the invoice details are readily available. The ASPs, GSPs give you option of real-time connectivity. That means whenever you are accounting, a real-time connectivity at the backend is given, or they give you an option of batch processing, wherein at the end of the day, all the invoices are accumulated, and then probably you do a bulk invoice upload, wherein then all the details for the day's invoice are then uploaded and then retrieved in a bulk format. So the entire process might sound a little tricky at first, but I think as other taxpayers have got used to it, I think with time, I think it will settle down quite well. So to summarize, what we've done is we have basically plotted the nature of transactions and their applicability at a single screen. So what is going to happen is for all your B2B invoices, including branch transfer, then debit notes, credit notes, export invoices to SEZ, foreign customers with payment or without payment, all these will always have your IRN and the QR code. The next set is your B2G invoices. So B2G, I think some of you might hear it for the first time. Basically, it is business to government. So if the government entity has a GSTIN or has a tax deductor number, basis that number, you are expected to generate IRN and QR code if you are going to invoice to them. If the government department does not have GST number, does not have the tax deductor number, then it will be a B2C transaction. Otherwise, it will form as part of B2G transactions. So all B2G transactions with invoice, debit note, and credit note will also be required to generate IRN and QR code. Next is B2C category. As we discussed, it is applicable only for entities with turnover greater than 500 crores. And for them, the invoice applicability requirement is the dynamic QR code. The next is bill of supply, basically your exempt transactions. For these transactions, for exempt transactions, you are not required to generate IRN and QR code. Similarly, for inward RCM self invoice, you are not required. However, if your service is, say, suppose I am a security guard service provider, my turnover crosses 20 crores. I am invoicing it. I'm invoicing my to a private limited company where this transaction is liable to RCM. Then I am expected to generate IRN and QR code for such transactions as well. I hope this is clear, and this summarizes what have we discussed and what type of transactions are covered and what are not covered. The next what we are going to discuss is basically what are the mandatory data requirements. All of these details are generally available in an invoice. So basically your invoice type, whether it is regular invoice type, whether it is SEZ, what is the nature, then invoice number, invoice date, obviously your own legal name, GSTIN, address, state, PIN code, all of these details are always going to be present. Likewise, buyer details, buyer's GSTIN, place of supply, address, state, PIN code, all of these details are always going to be there. I think one particular field that we think that many of you all might not have updated correctly is, I think, the PIN code. So you might just want to take a look at your own accounting ledgers of your customers and ensure that buyer PIN codes are correctly mentioned in each of their ledgers. So when the system is picking the details, PIN code details are correctly uploaded. Moving on, dispatch details, your ship to details, all of these are also required if they are applicable. And lastly, you have your invoice items, description, rate, GST, all of these details for the particular supply, whether it is goods, whether it is service, all of these are also going to be mandatory while generating your e-invoice. So how does the IRN look? The IRN is basically a computer generated 64-digit alphanumeric number, which is based on 4 parameters: supplier GSTIN, your financial year, document type, and the document number. So basically your GSTIN, financial number, document type could be invoice, debit note, credit note, and your document number. All these 4 combined would create a specific 64-digit number, which is only understood by computers. For us, it might seem random digits, but the computer understands it, and it is a unique number. So it is expected that whatever IRN that is generated, this 64-digit long number, alphanumeric number, is reflected on your tax invoice before the same is printed and handed over to your customer. Moving forward, as you can see, there are we have divided the screen into 5 segments. What is happening is, currently what happens is the yellow line, the yellow flow chart is what is currently happening. You book your invoice in the ERP accounting software, you print it, and it directly flows to your customer. Subsequently, in the next month, you upload these invoices in your GST returns, and then it is reflected in GSTR 2A 2B of your customer. However, once e-invoicing is made mandatory, this entire process is going to change. How this is going to change? Here it is. So basically, your ERP or your accounting software will record the basic details of invoices. Once these details are recorded, and once you have opted for ASP GSP, what is going to happen is this ASP GSP is going to take the data and push it to the invoice registration portal. So when these ASP GSP integrate with your software and take data, we need to ensure that there is a data security ensured by the GSP ASP provider. The data is transmitted correctly and there are no breakages, leakages. Ease of use would basically mean that just by a single click, you might be able to generate IRN. Integration will also ensure that less manual errors that creep into your systems. So once this ASP GSP pushes the data to invoice registration portal, the invoice registration portal, as we discussed, will generate a signed JSON, which will contain the IRN and the QR code. So invoice registration portal, what they also do is they ensure that they give you a window of canceling the IRN only up to 24 hours, running 24 hours. So if any invoice is generated with IRN at say 5:50 p.m., then up to next day's 5:49 p.m. only it will allow you to cancel. At 5:51 it will not allow you to cancel. So cancellation is going to be very difficult, and as we will discuss ahead, we do not recommend cancellation of IRNs once they are generated. Also, it is important to know that once the IRN is generated, there are no amendments that are possible. And why amendments are not possible? Because the authentication ensures that once IRN is generated, there is no possible way to amend it, and hence invoice amendment would not be possible. IRP portal also suggests that they do not save any data with them. So the data is purged very frequently, and hence even after say 24 or 48 hours, your data might not be available also with them. Once the data is flown, coming back to our process, once the invoice registration portal has sent back you the details, what they simultaneously do is also that they auto update your GSTR1. Currently, the lag is between 24 hours to 48 hours. Also, what they do is they enable this data to be pushed to your e-way bill. So invoice registration portal will automatically push details to your e-way bill portal also, and your GSTR1 details also. At the same time, your ASP GSP, what they do is they bring back the data with the signed JSON, they integrate it with your invoicing software, accounting software, and they help you print the IRN and the QR code on your invoice. Now, on the IRP portal, there is no option to amend, and hence we have to ensure that even your accounting or system software or your invoicing software also has such locks, wherein once the IRN is generated, there is no possibility to either amend or delete or modify the invoice that is generated with IRN. Hence, what in all of this process, it is of great importance to ensure that the invoice that is generated with IRN is final. The same has been discussed with customer. There are no amendments that happen subsequently, because all of this will then create a lot of mismatch or a lot of issues of reconciliation subsequently. Also, what happens in all of this, the IRP portal, while signing or while giving back the signed JSON which contains IRN and QR code, they also give a timestamp. So basically, if for a transaction of say 30th March 2022, you generate an IRN on say 10th of April, both these dates will be visible to the department, because the timestamp is a universal stamp. Your invoice date is what you're going to be using in your system. So this gap of 10 days will always be visible to the department officers as to, and then in subsequently it might attract unwanted attention, wherein they might question you as to why are there backdated transactions that happen. So as we discussed, reconciliation will happen, but it will also ensure that all the data, all the accounts finalization, or all the processes, monthly processes that happen, these will happen and get completed in a timely bound manner. And as we see, after all of this happens, coming back to our process, after all of this happens, your customer will also get these details available in their GSTR 2A. So what we've seen is whatever invoices that are uploaded in your GSTR 1 auto populated, the same details are also auto populated in GSTR 2A of your customer. So immediately your customer will also know that what transactions you have uploaded with IRN even before the physical copy of the invoice reaches them. So even though all of this is going to happen at the back end, the process flow is actually going to streamline a lot of things and also probably change a lot of business processes that are also being practiced currently. So keeping all of this in mind, we need to ensure that all these details are captured correctly at the first instance. Software upgradation, data security is maintained by ASP GSP, invoice registration portal, cancellation is not done by any other unauthorized persons, amendment is not done in invoices, your GSTR1 which is auto updated, that may be helpful while filing your GSTR1, wherein you need not upload all of these details again. And lastly, your customers are also made aware of the details very much beforehand, before even you give them the physical copy of invoice. So what is this process flow going to impact? Like we discussed, the last point which I was discussing was transparency with respect to your customer. So all of these details are going to be available with the customer even before you're going to hand them your physical copy of the invoice. As a result, uh, your it might help you with the fact that once these data are automatically made available to your customers, your payments might be released quicker. It will also ensure that the negotiations also, if there are any relating to price or any other things, that are also resolved quicker. The next thing is the near real-time finalization of records. So as you were discussing, that amendment is not permitted, and once amendment is not permitted, whatever invoice is generated, they are going to be treated as final. You cannot amend them, you cannot modify them. So once that happens, it is as good as saying that if you're not going to generate any invoices after 2nd or after 31st of March, then as it is as good as saying that your outward supply, your sales supply have frozen by the time you have 31st of March has come. Also, what this e-invoice process is going to whether support or be a boon or a bane, depends on the process as to how they are streamlined, because it definitely is going to require additional reconciliation, because your system will have e-invoice data, what is uploaded on the GST, and that also needs to be looked. If there are any invoices that are cancelled in the e-invoice portal but not cancelled with your financials, that will cause an issue. Yeah, or at the same time, these invoice details are going to be pushed to e-way bill also records. So all of these will have your details already mapped once e-invoice is generated. So we need to ensure that all of these different uh, segments contain correct and the final details only. The next thing which we wanted to discuss is basically we should avoid cancellation of e-invoices as much as possible, as the the window provided is very small. If this window is missed, then the only option that remains is debit note, credit note. And instead of using either cancellation or debit note, credit note routes, it is always recommended that we stick with only one route, that is debit note, credit note. Because what happens is, if you permit cancellation, you are in a way allowing some exceptions to be reported in your own system. And if there are exceptions in the system itself, then this will lead to bigger problems of reconciliation. Sometimes it may happen that you have cancelled invoices in your software but missed to cancel in your IRP portal. Likewise, you have cancelled at one IRP portal but you have not cancelled in your books. So to avoid all of this mismatch, it can be made a standard procedure as to no cancellation should be done. If there is any amendment that is required, that should be done through debit notes or credit notes only. One more important thing that we wanted to highlight was the IRN does not replace your invoice number. Whatever invoice number that is currently being generated by a system, that continues to be as it is. IRN is an additional requirement. It is an additional field that the government is going to give you. That is a 64-digit number with the QR code. That is additionally required to be incorporated in the invoice, and your regular series number does not change. The rules for your regular series number do not change, which you change you might change it every financial year, or you might continue the invoice series number, but that invoice series number does not change at all. Okay, so initially we discussed as to there could be big ramifications if e-invoice is applicable, but the same is not complied with. So as a supplier, if e-invoice provisions are applicable to me and I don't comply with those provisions, what are the consequences? The consequences are quite severe, to say the least. Firstly, they say, as we discussed, any invoice which you issue which is not an e-invoice will be treated as not a valid tax invoice. Second, there is a penalty which is equal to 100% of the tax due or 10,000, whichever is higher. So say suppose if there are 10 invoices which have where invoice is applicable and invoice not generated, the minimum penalty is 1 lakh rupees, subject to the fact that if the tax in those invoices is greater than 10,000, then that will be the penalty value. The next penalty is a lump sum penalty of 25,000 for incorrect invoicing. There is a chance that transporting goods without a valid e-invoice may also result into officers detaining your vehicle and the goods while they are in transit. So yeah, as a supplier, if you're not compliant, there are huge ramifications which are potentially, as a supplier, you might not be able to afford not being compliant in these cases. Now, as a recipient, if I am a recipient, how do I ensure, or what are the issues that I might face if my supplier is not compliant? So one school of thought says that since the tax invoice that is issued by the non-compliant supplier is not a valid tax invoice, then there is a possibility that department may come and question the ITC that you have availed based on such invalid tax invoice. So as a recipient, you might lose out on the ITC that you have claimed, interest and penalty separately. So yes, so how do you prevent, or how do you take precautions? So for that, probably one standard thing that is going around is basically you take an undertaking or a declaration from your supplier regarding their e-invoice compliances. If whether they are applicable, and if yes, they are complying. If not applicable, then stating that they are not liable to comply as of now, and moving forward, whenever these the e-invoicing provisions will be applicable, they will comply. So such a declaration or an undertaking can be taken from your suppliers. Moving forward, now how do we move forward with the e-invoice? So what are the steps that need to be taken as a supplier? What are the things that you need to do immediately in the next 15-20 days so that you ensure that on 1st April 2022 you are compliant? So first you need to decide whether you are going to choose an ASP GSP solution which will integrate with your existing software, or you are going to do a manual process. To give you a heads up, I will probably show you a live demo as to how manual process is done in the later half of this session. Next is whether you are going to integrate your business processes and IT software with ASP GSP, and if yes, that needs to happen very quickly. And once if you have decided to go with ASP GSP, whether the process is going to be batch process for say lump sum invoices at the day end, or is it going to be real time, as and when required, the e-invoice will be generated. From the finance and accounts point of view, as we discussed, GSTR1 will be auto populated. GSTR1 auto populated, but only to the extent of B2B invoices, B2B credit notes, B2B debit notes, B2G transactions, export transactions. The other details such as B2C, advances, your exempt supplies, HSN documents, only those details will be required to be will be required to be punched in the GSTR1. One additional process that you might want to undertake would be reconciliation of what is auto-populated and what is available in your own system. So that check may be required to be done before filing GSTR1. And simultaneously, you need to add these other details such as advances, exempt supplies, B2C, and so on. Also, as we discussed, vendor due diligence might be required to be taken up to ensure that your vendors are compliant, to ensure that your vendors are also compliant, so that you do not lose out on your ITC credit because of non-compliance of your vendor. And the last part would be account sanitization. This would basically mean to ensure that there are no duplicate accounts for the same party. The GST numbers are correctly updated. Like we discussed, PIN codes are correctly mapped in the ledgers. The state name, the state details are correctly mapped. Currently, what happens is sometimes in the address field only we write all the name, all the details. And in some software, there are separate tabs for PIN code, separate tabs for state code to be mentioned. So we need to ensure that the state details, the PIN code details, the address details, the GST details are correctly mapped in your own accounts as well. Lastly, from business and operations point of view, as we discussed, there is a timestamp which will be provided along with the IRN. As a result of this, it is going to be very easy for any officer to determine how late you have generated the e-invoice from the invoice date. So if your invoice date is of February, but you have generated the IRN in say March or April, it is going to be very easy for the officer to identify, which could result into unwanted attention. Hence, we need to ensure that all the invoices for a day and are generated within 1 or 2 days at max, which is explainable. But more than that, any delay more than that might entail unwanted attraction. Also, the entire process of e-invoicing, whether that has to be decentralized or centralized, depending on how your teams are placed, who is going to handle, how is it going to be handled internally, whether each branch will raise e-invoice at their own end, or it is going to be centralized at your one location, that needs to be taken care of. So before we actually take up a Q&A session, what I thought was it would be helpful for everybody that certain FAQs, which are a little relevant, which are a little unique, those we discuss, so that many queries might get resolved in these FAQs itself, and the balance queries then with that can be taken up subsequently. These FAQs were also issued by the government because initially when they rolled out e-invoice, there were few issues, there were a lot of confusions. So to answer those, they have updated these FAQs time and time again, and today we have a comprehensive list of FAQs. Out of that comprehensive list, I have taken some 12 to 15 FAQs which we will discuss today. Yeah, so the first one that we are going to look at is regarding B2G transactions. So what is the question that was asked? Whether e-invoice is applicable to supplies by notified person to government departments. So the answer is clearly yes. But how do you ensure that is what is answered by this FAQ? So what the FAQ says is, if the government department does not have a registration under GST, that is, it is not a registered person, then e-invoice doesn't arise because it will be a B2C transaction. However, if the government department has a GST-IN for supply of goods or services or deducting TDS, then the same has to be mentioned and e-invoice will be generated using this GST-IN of the government department. The next is whether high C sales, Sequoia, bonded warehouse sales, whether e-invoice is applicable to these transactions. So the answer again clearly is no, because these activities and transactions are neither supply of goods nor services. They do not attract any tax, and hence they are part of Schedule 3, and that is why e-invoice is not applicable for high C sales and bonded warehouse sales. The next question was basically regarding whether e-invoice is applicable for import transaction. So again, it is clarified that e-invoice is not going to be applicable for a bill of entry filed at the time of import. The next question, the government has provided certain entities to be outside e-invoice even if they cross the threshold limit. So what are these entities or these sectors where e-invoice is not applicable? So the supplier is a SEZ unit. All of these transactions have to be looked at from the supplier point of view. If I am a supplier, I am a regular supplier under GST, and I am issuing any invoices to an SEZ unit, that for those transactions e-invoice is applicable. But if I am a SEZ unit myself, then as a supplier I do not need to comply with e-invoicing provisions. So such cases are: supplier is a SEZ unit, supplier is an insurer, supplier is basically banking companies including NBFCs. The supplier is a GTA, goods transport agency, that they provide transportation of goods from one location to another. The supplier is providing passenger transportation services, and namely your airlines and the railways. Supplier is providing service of admission to exhibition of cinematographic films in multiplex. Basically, your theater chains are covered here. And lastly, the OIDARs, online information database access and retrieval services. If an OIDAR is even though their revenue, even though their turnover crosses 20 crores, they are not required to generate e-invoice because there is an exemption for these entities. Now the next related question that comes up is whether the exemption is only for the services or main services or to the entity as a whole. So what it is clarified that it is respect with the entire entity. So for example, if a bank is going to sell some of their fixed assets for some reason, then for those fixed assets or sale of fixed assets also, they need not generate e-invoice because the exemption for them is for the entire entity and not just their banking transactions. The next question is basically going to be a little relevant one, and also I think many might have this doubt. So what happens if so say suppose for example in the years up till now, I have not crossed 20 crores, but only during 2021 the same is crossed. Or rather, let's not take an example of 20 crores, let us take an example of 50 crores. For 50 crores, the applicable date was 1st April 2021. Till April 2021, my turnover never crossed 50 crores. If during financial year 2020-2021, sorry, 21-22, if during that year my turnover crossed 50 crores, then do I need to start e-invoicing from the date I cross 50 crores, or do I have to wait to the next financial year? So this FAQ clarifies that whenever your turnover exceeds the prescribed limit, you need to start e-invoicing from the beginning of the next financial year. So whenever you cross the limit, you did not start immediately, but once the financial year ends and the next financial year starts, that is when e-invoice is going to be applicable. The next question relating to security that was asked was whether IRP will store or archive these e-invoices. So the government has clarified that the invoice registration portal IRP will only be a pass-through portal. They will perform validations, they will generate the IRN, but they will not store any of your invoice data. This is what is exactly what we are discussing of data purging, as to they will not store your data once it is generated, required only to a limited period of time. They will save it and later on it will be deleted from their own warehouses, data warehouses. The next FAQ that was asked was at the time of generation of IRN, whether the GST INs have to be active or no. We all might have faced scenarios recently wherein your suppliers or your customers who are not filing their returns regularly, their GST registrations are suspended. So what this FAQ clarifies is that at the time of generation of the e-invoice, it is mandatory that both the registrations of the supplier as well as the recipient have to be active in the GST system. Only then your e-invoice will be generated. If the GST IN is not active, the e-invoice will not be generated, and probably you might have to disclose this transaction as a B2C transaction. Subsequently, you might say that what happens when such customers GST IN becomes active again. I think somewhere we all will need to keep a trail as to on a specific date on which the invoice was raised, it was suspended, and subsequently it was made active, and then the e-invoice was generated. So as to ensure that there is the question, if any, subsequently by office as to why this was delayed generated, so that is always answered. The next FAQ that was highlighted was whether the IRP will return a PDF or only a signed JSON file. So what the government has again clarified is that the IRP will only return a signed JSON. PDF copy will not be returned by the portal. However, the signed JSON has to be integrated in your ERP accounting, and that system has to generate a PDF. Also, what the government has done is they have provided a separate utility wherein if you upload the signed JSON copy, they also generate PDF, but that is a separate process and not linked with your IRN. So basically, if you want to generate a PDF of the e-invoice, you need to again do an additional process of taking that signed JSON which contains the IRN and the QR code and put it in another utility and generate the PDF for yourself. The next issue that came up is whether as a supplier, whether you are required to issue invoices in duplicate, triplicate, which is required currently. So again, the department has clarified that wherever e-invoice is applicable, you need not issue invoicing in duplicate and triplicate. The single invoice which is generated, that copy itself can be issued, that can be used at all places. So does this mean where e-invoicing is applicable, e-way bill is not required? That was one of the questions, and for that question, the department has again clarified that e-way bill, wherever it is compulsory as of today, that continues to be mandatory even moving forward. E-invoicing does not hamper your e-way bill process at all. Wherever e-way bill is required, that requirement continues to be mandatory. E-invoicing does not stop you from generating e-way bills. The next few questions are related to cancellation and amendment, which again might be very relevant. So what was asked was, can you amend an invoice which is reported to IRN, which is reported to the IRP, and IRN has already been generated? For such cases, the department has stated that amendments are not possible once the IRN is generated by the IRP. What they, however, say is, once these details are auto-populated in the GSTR1 return, there, before filing, you can edit the invoice. And if there is any amendment, that can be done on the portal, on the GST portal, where we currently file returns, and not on the invoice registration portal. However, once these changes are done, it will immediately flag these changes to the proper officer, that stating that, okay, see, e-invoice was generated with so and so data. However, while filing the GSTR1, the same details were amended. So there is a possibility that your e-invoice might have different data and your GSTR1 might have a different data. And hence we suggest that amendments route should not be opted for. Moving ahead, can an IRN invoice be reported to the IRP be cancelled? So yes, cancellation is provided, but this cancellation feature is enabled only up to running 24 hours, as we discussed. Also, if the e-way bill is generated using this invoice for which IRN is generated, which is active or either verified, even then cancellation of IRN will not be permitted. And what they're also specifically saying is, once the IRN is cancelled, GSTR1, wherein the details were auto populated, there also they will show a cancelled status. So in all, there is always going to be a track of what was generated and what was cancelled. It is not going to be a case that it will be entirely erased from all the softwares and all the databases. The next question, which is linked to cancelled invoice, is that can a cancelled invoice number be used again for which IRN was already generated? So again, it is clarified that once IRN is generated, the same invoice number again cannot be used to generate another IRN or another invoice number. This is because, as we discussed, if you guys remember, there were four unique parameters: GSTIN, financial year, invoice type, and invoice number. These four together combined created one single IRN. So if once the IRN is generated and that is cancelled subsequently, if using the same invoice number, if you try to generate, it is always going to give a same IRN number, which is again going to be rejected because it will be a duplicate transaction for the IRP. And hence what they say is, basically once it is cancelled, you cannot use the same invoice number. That invoice number in totality will be treated as cancelled. Again, can you partially cancel a reported invoice? So again, the answer is a clear no. Invoice will be cancelled in total. There is no partial cancellation possible. Also, there is no reason which which be assigned. But once it is required to be cancelled, it will be cancelled in entirety. This cancellation is different from your debit note, credit notes options. Just to clarify. So I think we've come to the last part, wherein I think all my FAQs have also completed. I have tried to take up a few. I wanted to show as to how e-invoicing will be done. So what I'm going to do is, first I'm going to share the portal as to where as to how this is going to be made available. Yeah. So first I'll take you to the website itself. So I hope my screen is visible. Okay. This is your e-invoice 1 GST portal. Here, if you see, they have already posted a notification stating that from 1st April 2022 to whom it is going to be applicable. As we discussed, you need to enable yourself. So under this registration tab, there is this option for e-invoice enablement. Here, you need to enable yourself. You need to mention your GST, enter the capture code, and then it will show you the details, and you need to enable using the OTP, which will come on your registered mobile number. Once you have enabled yourself, the next would be creating your portal login credentials, which will be on this link for e-invoice registration form. I'll just show again. Under this registration tab, there are two options. First is e-invoice enablement, and the second option is portal login. So under this portal login option is where you need to create your login credentials. And last but not the least, if you are not opting for your ASP GSP integration with your softwares, how do you manually ensure this process is done? So under this help tab, there is this option of tools, and under tools there are two options: bulk generation tools and verify QR code. So we opt for this bulk generation tools, and on this screen there are two options which are available for generation of e-invoice. The first option is this GEPP version, which basically stands for GST e-invoice preparation and printing tool, which is basically like a utility, Excel based utility, comparatively easy to understand. And the next other option is basically a single Excel file itself, in which you punch in the details, the Excel itself validates and generates a JSON, which then you have to separately upload on the portal. So what I've also done is I have downloaded these files, and I thought I might just show those details as well. So first I will like to show the single Excel screen, the single Excel, which was JSON preparation form. So this is how the Excel file looks like. Basically, in the profile details, once you mention the profile details and answer a few questions, based on these questions and answers, your e-invoice tab is enabled. So as you can see, there are a lot of details that need to be mentioned, right from supplier code, supply type code. So whether it is B2B, SEZ, SEZ without exports, whether it is reverse charge, yes or no. Then whether IGST is applicable for intrastate, document type, document number. Once you mention all of these details, and it is a long set of details, after that, after mentioning all of these details, what you need to do is you need to validate the data that you have recorded. Once you validate the record, then this option for enabling JSON is enabled, preparing the JSON is enabled. And wherever your Excel file is currently in your system, at the same place, they will prepare and save a JSON file. That JSON file is something that will need to log in into your ERP, your IRP login credentials, and there you will have to upload this JSON, and in return the system will give you a signed JSON which contains the IRN and the QR code. This was one way of generating your e-invoices. The second system, the GEPP version, is basically it is like an app wherein if you see, I have tried to do one invoice and keep it ready, so that here what is happening is you need to mention your supplier profile details, then you update your recipient masters. So here you keep on adding all your recipients one by one, and this is going to be helpful so that once the details are fed in here, there is no mistake if you are going to subsequently add, because it will then always keep on taking from the existing records. Similarly, there is a product master. Basically, for all the goods or services that you supply, you need to prepare a product master as well. And why this is going to be helpful, I'll just show you in a minute. Say for example, if I am generating a new invoice, all that I've got to do here is just mention the name. So once I mention the name, the other details automatically get captured from the database, and the other details I will need to mention as to whether it is a B2B supply, SEZ supply, document type, tax invoice, credit note, debit note, and the document number. Once that is done, I then need to add my the supply details as to what I'm going to supply. So here, my first serial number, product description, freight. Once I select freight, all the details which were already existing for freight, that those get auto captured here. Quantity is 1, unit price is, say suppose 50,000. So if you see, all the other details of taxable value, gross amount, SGST, CGST, total value get automatically captured. And once I click on submit, the details of my product got auto captured here. And once that is done, it will give me an option to punch in e-way bill details also if there are. Since this is a case of service, it will not be applicable. Once I press submit, this is the type of preview that is shared by the system, wherein category B2B, document number, document type, date, seller's details, purchaser details, product details, all of these are clearly mentioned. And once all of this is confirmed, Then you may confirm the transaction, and this transaction then will go to your my pending invoices for which e-invoice is not yet generated. So these two transactions are which I have generated today. I have yet to generate my e-invoice for them. So again, I will validate these transactions. They are validated because all the details are correctly mentioned. Then if you can see, prepare JSON has now been enabled. So once I click on this prepare JSON, JSON will be generated and it will be saved at the same location where my current file has been saved. So e-invoice version 2 JSON is generated. This JSON file is something that I will be required to upload. And once that is done, here itself, it will give you an option of importing QR code. If we can see here on the left side, third option, importing QR code. So whatever JSON that has been generated, all I need to do is just import the QR code. So once I import the QR code, in this details of column BGH HI, the details which are generated from the IRP portal, they will get auto populated here, and my e-invoice will be generated. Subsequently, they will allow me to push to history basically would mean that this data will now be final and I can generate a PDF from this utility itself. And that invoice will be similar to the previewed one which we saw, and that e-invoice can then be generated, issued to your customer. It might seem a long process if we are opting for manual process. However, if your software, say if what we have seen is basically Tally has this Tally Prime version, wherein at a single or at max 2 to 3 clicks, the e-invoice is generated at the back end, because Tally themselves are ASP GSPs. So there are such softwares also in the market. There are others also who provide you with patches, integrate with your existing systems, and once this is done, they at the back end prepare the data and give it to you for your which has to be again loaded back into your own systems, and your invoice will be generated as per your existing formats. I think I have covered all the details which I have planned to cover, and we have covered it in the time bound manner as well. So yeah, I would like to open the floor for questions if there are any, so that they can be sorted out immediately, since we are all together here. If there are any, please let us know.
I have got one question. It is regarding debit note, credit note. It has to be also to the portal only for which IR and QR code should be generated?
Correct, sir. Correct. For debit note and credit note, wherein your customer is a B2B or a B2G entity, for the same set, the same rules will be applicable for an invoice and for debit note, credit notes. So
only if they are tax debit notes and credit notes. If they are financial debit notes or credit notes, then e-invoicing is not required.
Okay, wherever the tax GST is involved, that will be
correct.
To add on to what Yash sir said, there could be a case wherein your invoice is, say, issued in February, but your credit note is issued in the subsequent next year. Even though your invoice did not have your IRN, in the next year you will still be required to generate e-invoice for your credit notes as well.
Say that again.
See, suppose your right now e-invoice is not applicable to you, so your current tax invoice do not have IRN.
Right.
But say suppose you issue a credit note in April 22 when e-invoice is applicable to you. At that time,
Yes.
even if your original invoice did not have IRN, your credit note or your debit note would still be required to be issued using the e-invoicing mechanism only.
Okay.
Aman, I think we have one question in the chat box. So the question is, can I generate backdated invoice within the month? Yes, definitely you can generate. It is not advisable that you generate a backdated invoice, but currently the system, the IRP does not have this check wherein they don't allow you backdated invoicing. So you can, but it is not advisable to do backdated invoicing. Do we have any more questions? I think, Aman, you can close the session.
Thank you everyone for such a patient hearing. I hope it was enriching, and I hope all the relevant details were correctly captured, and whatever actions that you might have to take, I hope this session was useful for that. Also wishing everybody a safe Holi. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.